Hey guys, this is Tyler here. It is August 16th, and quick topic here, and that's why I would avoid roommates if you're living in a foreign country. Quick tidbit here is I have lived in very different accommodations while I've lived abroad. I've lived in South America and in Europe, and of course I'm from the US, and I've actually had roommates in all of these places. I lived with friends together. I've lived with a host family. My first year I was living in South America. I've lived by myself. When I was back at home, I also lived with my family. So I've kind of experienced the whole spectrum of things, and it's really interesting kind of the differences amongst all these experiences. And I think it's important to understand how each one is different. So my first year of living in South America, I actually lived with the host family, and that was really cool, honestly. And looking back, that was a good decision. I mean, my parents essentially obliged me to do this. They were funding my my education and my living costs, so I don't really have any choice, and I was fine with this. I actually had a really cool host family, and they were very nice people. I think I probably had one of the best host families in this program. I mean, I had known multiple students with host families, and there were, including my brother who lived in Argentina, and I mean, there was a lot of problems amongst many of these people. I mean, in terms of my overall situation, I think I probably had one of the best host families, which was really cool, honestly, looking back. I still am in contact with them, and they were awesome people. So that was cool, honestly. If you live for a year or you're just new to a country, especially South America, host family is awesome. When I went into my second year, I lived with roommates in South America, and that was quite different in many respects. From that experience, I kind of realized that I was probably better suited to live by myself while in a foreign country. It wasn't necessarily problems I had with these people. I just felt that for me as a person, I could get more done, especially if I was working from home, which I typically was. I was doing like an online study program in this year. That was like in 2015, and I was finishing or 2014, I was finishing my education then. And so I was working mostly from home. Especially if you're working from home, a lot of people that live in foreign countries are self-employed. They do contract work, they work from their computers, and they essentially can work from home, or they can work at one of these WeWork places. It's often really important to look at your condition and where you're working, and if it's suitable long term. Now, understand that you may move into an apartment or into a living situation and think that it's a suitable place, and then a few weeks later you realize, oh, this isn't the best place, and then you may have to change the accommodation. And especially if you're someone that plans on working from home, keep this in mind. Like when you rent an apartment, if the apartment seems just barely large enough for you living, if it comes to both living and work, it's not going to be sufficient. You're going to want an apartment that's sufficiently large, and you have to look at this like an office. And so this expenditure is well worth it. I mean, it may seem a little more expensive with the accommodation you need to rent, but it's actually worth it. You'll accomplish more, and it will be well worth the money spent. There's various problems, of course, if you rent and have roommates with other people. The most obvious problem is the fact that you can't control these people and their lifestyles. I mean, I've known of people, my sister had roommates in Chicago, and they were doing some very shady stuff, we'll say. They were heavy into partying, and they were actually engaging in illegal activities that could have actually put her, that could have become a safety risk for on her behalf. And especially in these situations, it's best to avoid. I mean, if you're living in a foreign country, you can have your documents revoked, and you could be deported, and then you're gone. So keep that in mind. Also understand that a lot of these people, when they find roommates, they don't really screen them that well. They're not like family or true friends that they've known a long time. So they don't really know what these people are about. They've only seen their lifestyle for maybe a couple weeks at most. Often I read about people just meeting roommates through websites or something, and I don't think this is a good idea, honestly. I think if you really don't know the person too well, you shouldn't start the situation. You may realize, oh, this isn't going to work, and then you have to basically repeat the process over, and that can become a huge complication in the future. Also note that when you have agreements with the landlord, you're not subleasing. And when I say subleasing, I mean if your name is on the agreement, like you have two other roommates, the landlord is going to hold all three of you accountable. And so if there's any kind of damage, if there's issues of any sort, you could all be held accountable, and this could be a problem, especially if you're if you haven't had any involvement. You could be grouped in with these people, and this could just become a huge problem. I mean, this could potentially escalate to something worse down the road. I had an acquaintance when I was in St. Petersburg, Russia. There were three guys. They were roommates, and they hosted parties, and it got so bad the landlord was just at wit's end because they were getting a lot of complaints from neighbors. And surprisingly, one of the guys of the three guys had nothing to do with the partying of these guys. He was completely separated. He often, in fact, when they would party, he wouldn't even be at home. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. I think two of the guys were from Norway, and I think the other guy was from like France or Germany, and he had like nothing to do with it, but he got kind of grouped in with the two other guys with this, and eventually what happened is that the landlord kicked them out. They were evicted, and they didn't get their deposit back, and it looked bad, of course, but he didn't have any say in the matter. He was grouped in on this lease agreement, and that's what it became. So this type of thing is common, and just be careful here. Privacy is another issue some people complain about, and this will also become more limited when you live with other people. For some people, it can be a matter of wanting their own cooking area to just be used for themselves. They don't want to have a shared cooking space. Other people may want their own like living room, or they may feel that maybe their own bathroom or any other room they don't want to share it. So all your living space is going to become communal. You're not going to have the same kind of privacy as you would if you were by yourself. And also in the sense that, as I alluded to earlier, if people are bringing kind of social people into your home, this could be a problem. You're going to have to deal with people bringing potentially disastrous situations into their home. When I lived in Chile with my former roommates, we actually would tell each other if we were bringing someone there, like to visit or to stay. We would always pass it on with each other, and just so that it was out in the air, so everyone was aware of it, and so there weren't any problems down the road, which was good. I mean, that's a important thing to do if you do have people come over or something. If you're living with roommates, just tell the guys or the girls that, look, I am bringing such and such person over, and they're going to be here. It's just good for courtesy. A big complication if you're sharing space with roommates is what happens if someone has to move, if someone has to leave the country. There's a transition, and this is so important, especially for foreign people to realize. Like, just think in your home country if you have roommates. I mentioned my sister. She's had a lot of roommates in her day, and most of these people have been from America. But in cases where people are living in a foreign country, if all of you guys are foreigners, it's very likely, if you say have 2 or 3 roommates, at least one of those people is going to probably be leaving the country within that year or following year. So if everyone is on the same lease agreement, you have to consider that you're going to be losing this renter. This means that you're going to have to find someone else. If you can find someone else, then they're going to have to be added to the agreement. If that other person that leaves had caused disruption or destruction, that's going to have to be kind of figured in. It's also going to have to be understood that that person probably won't get like any type of deposit back. So these are all complications that will arise when you have roommates if you're living abroad. So understand this. I mean, if it's really common, I think, for foreign people to have different pasts and different ambitions in that country, and they may have to leave at a moment's notice. They may have to leave within the week or following month. There may be a family problem back at home and they have to go. Well, then that's going to be a missing rental that will have to be compensated for. I knew another person, former acquaintance of mine in St. Petersburg, Russia, and he had 3 or 4 other roommates, I can't recall, and they were paying what amounted to be, I think, around $1,500 or $1,600 a month for a apartment in St. Petersburg, or I think it was maybe a bit more. But 1 or 2 of the guys were leaving. They were leaving Russia, and so it was only 2 guys that were sharing it, and they were both students. They didn't have a lot of funds or financial means, so they could not cover this remaining expense. On top of that, the landlord wanted to increase their rent within the next 2 months. So it was a very complicated situation, and they actually ended up having to leave. And that's what I meant, that these issues arise, and it could force all the other people to move. And this is quite common. I had another roommate when I was living in South America, in Chile, and this guy was from Canada, and he had problems with one of his roommates. He had 2 roommates. One was a girl, another was a guy. They were actually Chilean, brother and sister. He was Canadian, and the girl, she would always pay. The guy, though, would often refuse to pay. And it got to a point where he was like 3 months behind, or 2 months, and eventually he ended up just leaving. He took off one day, and the guy never like saw or heard from him again. He hadn't paid for a few months, and so he ended up having to cover the rent for him. And it was a kind of messy situation. And surprisingly, these guys before that were friends. They had met at the same university. This is how this situation went down. So these are just the kind of things that can happen while living abroad. And I look forward to everyone's feedback here on this first part of the video, and thanks for all the commentary.